I'm a 28-year-old freelance graphic designer, and according to my family, that basically means I'm unemployed. My parents, my older brother David, 33M, and my younger sister Jessica, 31 Thef, all have real careers. David's a doctor, Jessica's a lawyer, and I'm the sibling they introduce with, oh, he does something with computers. Family gatherings are always the same: backhanded compliments, passive-aggressive remarks, and a full-blown highlight reel of my siblings' accomplishments, while my job is treated like a quirky little hobby. I usually just smile, nod, and wait until I can go home. But this time they planned something special. A few weeks ago, my mom sent a family group chat message about a family bonding weekend at our parents' house. The level of excitement in her text was suspicious. My parents are the kind of people who believe bonding means discussing career goals and comparing bank accounts. Mom insisted this wasn't like our usual gatherings. It was going to be fun. Competitive, but fun. That was my first red flag. David responded first, saying it sounded like a great idea. Jessica followed, adding how it would be a great chance to reconnect. I was already planning my excuse to avoid it when Mom messaged me directly. It wouldn't be the same without you. Don't worry, there's something for everyone. Something for everyone. Another red flag. But saying no would have resulted in a guilt trip long enough to put me in therapy, so I gave in. The moment I walked through the door, I knew I had made a mistake. David and Jessica were already there, sitting in the living room like royalty, while my parents hovered over them. My mom was beaming as she handed David a drink and asked about his latest groundbreaking medical case. Jessica's husband, a financial consultant who only speaks in stock market metaphors, was talking to my dad about investment portfolios. I barely made it through the front door before Mom turned to me with a smile that was way too forced. "Oh, you made it. How's work?" The hesitation before work told me everything. I shrugged. "Busy." Jessica didn't even look up from her phone. "Are you still doing those little designs?" "Little designs." Before I could answer, David chuckled. "Hey, at least you're your own boss, right?" Translation: at least you don't have to answer to anyone while struggling to pay rent. I ignored it and went to drop my bag in the guest room, already counting down the hours until I could leave. After dinner, Mom clapped her hands together like a camp counselor. "All right, everyone. It's time for our big surprise." Dad pulled out a whiteboard with Family Olympics written at the top. "We'll be competing in different challenges throughout the weekend." Mom explained, "It's all in good fun, but we'll also be keeping score." David smirked. "Are there prizes?" Mom's eyes practically sparkled. "Bragging rights, of course." I didn't miss the way she glanced at David and Jessica like she was already engraving their names on a trophy. The list of events was suspiciously specific. Medical trivia, public speaking, business strategy challenge, obstacle course, baking contest, debate competition, logic puzzles. 3 events directly catered to David and Jessica's fields, a few generic ones, and then logic puzzles. That was the only one that seemed remotely fair. Mike, my cousin who also happened to be the other family disappointment, leaned over and whispered, "So basically they planned a competition that we're supposed to lose." I nodded. Mike grinned. "Want to make it interesting?" I wasn't sure what he meant at the time, but I was already tired of being the family punching bag. "Let's do it." We started with medical trivia, because of course we did. It went exactly how you'd expect. David breezed through every question. Jessica got a few right because she was married to a guy who loved talking about health insurance policies. I got one question right by pure luck, and the entire room acted like it was the most shocking moment of the year. Jessica laughed. "Wow, maybe you missed your calling." David shook his head. "Nah, medicine isn't for everyone." I let it slide. The second event, public speaking, Jessica took center stage like she was about to argue a case in the Supreme Court. Perfect posture, perfect delivery, the whole 9 yards. I had zero chance of winning, so I decided to take a different approach. I stood up and gave a dramatic speech about the history of memes, dead serious. I broke down the evolution from rage comics to reaction images to modern-day viral TikToks. I even threw in a slideshow for effect. Half the room was crying from laughter. The other half, including my parents, looked like they wanted to disown me on the spot. When the votes came in, Jessica won obviously, but Mike caught my eye from across the room and mouthed, "Totally worth it." The unexpected win, logic puzzles. By the end of the night, I had lost every challenge. No surprise there. But then we got to logic puzzles. Turns out, years of working in design, problem solving for clients, and figuring out how to make impossible deadlines work had actually given me an edge. I crushed it. David struggled. Jessica tried to use some corporate strategy nonsense that made no sense. And me, I finished the final puzzle before anyone else even figured out what we were supposed to do. Mom laughed nervously. "Wow, lucky break, huh?" Dad shook his head. "Let's not make a big deal out of one round." Mike, on the other hand, stood up and cheered like I had just won the Super Bowl. That's when I realized something. They weren't expecting me to win anything. I wasn't supposed to do well. I was supposed to sit there, lose, and let them confirm their belief that I was the least successful one in the family. Well, too bad, because now I was actually going to try. I woke up on day 2 with a different mindset. The night before had been an eye-opener. Winning the logic puzzle round wasn't supposed to happen. The look on my parents' faces, the awkward silence when they couldn't immediately dismiss it. There was something satisfying about it. They had expected me to fail, maybe even wanted me to. The morning started like every other family gathering, David and Jessica being praised like royalty over breakfast while I was an afterthought. Mom hovered around David, listening to him explain something about a new patient case, while Dad nodded along as Jessica's husband talked about investment strategies. The only person who seemed remotely entertained was Mike, who was already nudging me under the table like he knew what was coming next. The first event of the day was the obstacle course. It was supposed to be an easy win for David, who played tennis on the weekends, and Jessica, who did Pilates or whatever rich people did for exercise. I wasn't even supposed to be a contender, except turns out, being a freelancer who works from home doesn't mean you're out of shape. David struggled almost immediately. The climbing wall slowed him down, and by the time he hit the balance beam, he was already gasping. Jessica wasn't much better. I, on the other hand, made it through with a steady pace and somehow ended up placing second. Dad clapped David on the back and told him it was a hard course, while Mom reassured Jessica that not everyone is meant for physical challenges. When they announced the rankings, they barely acknowledged my placement, as if it hadn't just shattered their expectations. Then came the baking challenge. This was a wild card event, and no one knew what to expect. The goal was to bake cookies from scratch, judged by aunts and uncles. David's cookies, burnt to a crisp. Jessica's, looked great, but were so salty even she had to spit it out. Mine, perfect. Years of cooking for myself had paid off. The moment the judges took a bite, one of my uncles actually gave me an approving nod. For the first time, someone in the family acknowledged that I was good at something. That's when the shift happened. Mom laughed nervously and reminded everyone that the real tests were still coming. Next up was the business pitch competition, which was practically designed for Jessica and David to dominate. They each had polished professional PowerPoint presentations. David pitched an idea for a medical startup that was way too complicated for anyone to care about. Jessica did some corporate strategy thing that sounded straight out of a business textbook. Then it was my turn. I confidently walked up and presented a completely ridiculous business idea: rentable, emotional support geese. With a straight face, I explained how geese were fiercely loyal and could provide protection, companionship, and emotional stability. I even threw in a fake marketing campaign, complete with a slideshow of stock images featuring geese in emotional situations. The room lost it. Aunts and uncles were crying from laughter. Jessica looked ready to explode. David stared at me like I had grown a second head. When it came time to vote, the judges, aka the extended family, chose me as the winner. That was when things started falling apart for my parents. Suddenly, the scoring was adjusted. After every round, the scores were calculated, and somehow, David and Jessica's rankings never dropped. No matter how many events I won, nobody explained how the new system worked, but the results were clear. No one outright said anything, but it was obvious. Jessica was the first to snap. She confronted me in front of everyone, accusing me of ruining the event by making a joke out of everything. I didn't argue. I just smiled. Mike, on the other hand, was done pretending. He loudly pointed out that if the competition was really about celebrating strengths, then why was everyone acting like my wins didn't count? The tension in the room shifted. The aunts and uncles, who had been laughing and enjoying the games, were now noticing the favoritism. Then came the talent show event. David gave a serious medical demonstration, complete with charts and diagrams. Jessica recited a legal speech like she was arguing in court. I got on stage, looked directly at my parents, and performed an over-the-top dramatic poetry reading about what it was like being the family disappointment. Mike was on the floor laughing. Aunts and uncles clapped through tears. Even David cracked a smile. Mom and Dad, stone-faced. Then came the moment everything changed. Seeing me gain traction, my parents suddenly announced that the last few events would have weighted scores. Jessica and David looked relieved. Mike, without missing a beat, asked the question that shut the entire room down. Was this whole thing designed just to prove OP is the least successful? Silence. No one spoke. No one even moved. Then Mom, in the fakest voice possible, laughed and said, "Of course not. This was about celebrating everyone's strengths." Nobody bought it. The illusion was gone. The favoritism was out in the open, and for the first time in my entire life, the extended family noticed it. Jessica and David weren't winning because they were the best. They were winning because the entire thing had been rigged from the start. I had one more shot to turn the tables completely, and this time, I wasn't holding back. The final event was a debate showdown, and from the moment it was announced, everyone knew exactly who was supposed to win. Jessica was already smirking. She had spent years arguing in courtrooms and winning cases. This was her event, the one where she could absolutely crush me and put everything back in order. Mom and Dad looked relaxed for the first time all weekend. The topics were announced, and it was the most blatant rigging I had seen yet. Corporate law, business ethics, financial regulations. David and Jessica immediately looked confident. The questions were designed for them, and everyone in the room knew it. Mike muttered under his breath, not even trying to be subtle. The first round was me against David. The topic, the effects of technological advancements in modern business. David started strong, but it didn't take long for the cracks to show. He stuck to dry statistics and medical industry jargon no one really cared about. The judges, aka our aunts, uncles, and cousins, were clearly zoning out. Then it was my turn. I switched gears completely. Instead of throwing out dry facts, I told a story. I talked about the evolution of social media, how memes had shaped marketing, how companies had failed spectacularly by not understanding internet culture. I made references that actually entertained the room, and by the time I finished, even David looked like he knew he had lost. When the votes were counted, I won the round. For the first time that weekend, David lost a competition. The room wasn't laughing at me anymore. Jessica's smirk was gone. Then came the final round. Me versus Jessica. She stood up with the confidence of someone who had already won. She gave the perfect textbook argument, flawlessly structured, hitting every technical point. It was polished, professional, and completely forgettable. Then it was my turn. I didn't match her professionalism. I went for engagement. I cracked a joke right out the gate, got the room laughing. I made ridiculous comparisons. I used examples from real-life situations that the family could actually relate to. Jessica had the stronger argument, but I had the audience. By the time I finished, the room was on my side. Then came the vote. One by one, hands went up for me. More than Jessica. Mom's face dropped. Jessica's eyes went wide. I had won. Jessica wasn't moving. She looked around the room, like she was waiting for someone to remind her that this wasn't supposed to be a real competition. Mom immediately jumped in, laughing awkwardly. Well, debates are subjective. This doesn't really determine the best. Mike leaned forward. Funny, if Jessica had won, would it have counted? Silence. Jessica's husband shifted in his seat. David actually looked amused. Then came the final family shift. Aunts and uncles, cousins, they weren't pretending anymore. One of the uncles shook his head. You know, maybe this whole thing wasn't as fair as we thought. Mom forced a tight smile. Well, at the end of the day, these are just silly games, she said, her voice laced with forced cheer. Dad nodded too quickly, eager to shift the attention back to David and Jessica. Dad cleared his throat, trying to salvage the moment. Well, at the end of the day, the real winner isn't determined by some games. It's about life success. I didn't even hesitate. If you don't like the results, maybe you should have picked fairer games. Jessica stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped over. She stormed out of the room, grabbing her bag on the way. Mom looked like she wanted to follow her, but instead she just sat there, frozen. Then the most unexpected thing happened. David, the golden child, let out a small chuckle, then quickly masked it, as if realizing he wasn't supposed to find this funny. For the first time, he looked like he was seeing the cracks in the system too. He shook his head and looked at me. You actually did really well. The moment hung in the air. Then Mike clapped. One cousin joined in. Then another. Then the entire room. Mom and Dad weren't clapping. Their perfect family competition, their big plan to prove I was the least successful, had ended with me as the winner, and they hated it. I walked out of that house with my head held high. Not because I won, but because for the first time ever, they couldn't ignore it. The awkwardness in the room after my win was so thick, you could slice it with a knife. Jessica was still gone, having stormed off after the debate. Mom and Dad looked like someone had unplugged them. Their perfect plan had collapsed right in front of them, and now they were stuck pretending everything was fine. David sat back in his chair, arms crossed. He looked between our parents and the extended family, his usual smugness replaced by something more unreadable, maybe realization, maybe discomfort. Then, almost reluctantly, he smirked. Mike, on the other hand, was having the time of his life. He leaned over, grinning like he had just won the lottery, and whispered, I think we just witnessed history. A couple of aunts and uncles chuckled under their breath. One cousin actually clapped. Mom did not look amused. Dinner was painfully forced. Mom kept her voice light and casual, acting like we had just wrapped up a friendly board game instead of a rigged competition that had blown up in her face. Well, that was fun, she said, her smile just a little too tight. At the end of the day, it's all about family bonding. Mike snorted into his drink. I just smirked. If Jessica or David had won, she'd be giving a whole speech about excellence, hard work, and how true success always shines through. Jessica came back just in time for dessert. Didn't look at me once. I tried to talk to her, just to see where she stood. She brushed past, muttering, congratulations, I guess. Spent the rest of the evening avoiding eye contact like I had personally ruined her career. David was surprisingly chill about it. Later, while everyone was picking at leftovers, he casually admitted that he thought I would lose. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah, so did Mom and Dad. David just shrugged, like he wasn't actually mad about it. That's when I found the trophy. Sitting on the kitchen counter tucked behind a fruit bowl was a pre-engraved custom trophy. Family champion, David/Jessica, no other names. They hadn't even considered the possibility that I could win. I picked it up and turned to Mom, holding it up. Wow, this is nice. Guess you had this made in advance? Mom froze mid-step. For the first time all weekend, she stammered. "Oh, we ordered that weeks ago." The room went dead silent. Mike made a dramatic coughing noise that sounded suspiciously like rigged. The younger cousins were dying. One of them, barely holding back laughter, asked, "So now that OP won, are we doing a rematch?" Mom immediately changed the subject. Jessica's husband, Mark, who usually kept his mouth shut, muttered, "Real success isn't measured in silly games." I didn't even hesitate. Good thing this whole thing wasn't my idea then. A few relatives outright laughed. Jessica did not. Dad was noticeably quiet for most of the night. Then, just before we all started heading to bed, he finally acknowledged me. "You did well, son." That was it. No over-the-top praise. No analysis of my strengths. Just those 4 words. It was the closest thing to a compliment I had ever gotten from him. Jessica, though, not handling it well. I caught her in the kitchen later that night, whisper yelling to Mom. She was furious, humiliated, going on about how unfair it was, how she shouldn't have lost, how I was making a joke out of the whole thing. Mom, still desperate to keep the golden child fantasy alive, tried to calm her down. "No one actually thinks OP is more successful than you." I casually walked into the kitchen. "Oh, don't worry, I heard everything." Jessica whipped around, looking like she had just been caught stealing test answers. Mom looked exhausted. I poured myself a drink and took my time, letting the tension hang. Then, just to twist the knife a little, I raised my glass and said, "To family unity, right?" Jessica left early the next morning, didn't make a scene, didn't try to argue, just announced she had real responsibilities to get back to. Nobody begged her to stay. While packing up my things, I grabbed the pre-engraved trophy and walked over to Mom, held it up. Couldn't even hide my grin. "Hey Mom, I think you need to get this redone." The look on her face was priceless. The family group chat exploded before I even made it home. Cousins were going wild, dropping memes, jokes, and barely disguised shots at how the weekend had unfolded. Someone sent a photoshopped image of me holding an Olympic gold medal. Another cousin asked, "So is OP defending their title next year?" Aunts and uncles were more subtle, leaving vague but loaded comments like, "Well, that was certainly an interesting weekend, and didn't expect that outcome." Mom, she wasn't laughing. She sent one of those classic passive-aggressive messages, talking about how she appreciated everyone's participation and how the real goal was to bring the family together. Mike immediately replied with a trophy emoji. The group chat erupted again. Jessica, of course, took the loss online. A few hours later, she made a vague LinkedIn post about how true success isn't about competing with family, but about personal growth and meaningful impact. The best part, she never mentioned me directly, but it was painfully obvious who the post was about. I couldn't resist. I commented agreed. "Glad we all had fun though." Jessica blocked me, not just on Facebook, on everything. By the next morning, Mom was already rewriting history. She told relatives that the event was never meant to be serious, and that some people just took it too far. Mike texted me. "Then why was there a damn trophy?" Attached was a screenshot from a cousin who had overheard my parents talking before the weekend even started. The entire thing had been planned to teach OP a lesson. I just laughed. Then, something unexpected happened. David texted me privately. "Honestly, I feel bad. That whole thing was unfair to you." I stared at my phone for a second. David, the golden child, the family favorite. Admitting that, I just replied, "Appreciate it." It didn't change anything, but it was the first time in years he had actually acknowledged the favoritism. Then came Mom's last-ditch effort at control. I got an email from her, all about being mature and not gloating. I replied, "I just played the game you made up." No response. Relatives started choosing sides. Some backed me. Others tried to defend my parents. An aunt shrugged and said, "It's just how families are." Mike and I immediately roasted her in the cousins chat. But the best moment? Grandma. Grandma, who never sugarcoats anything, pulled me aside at a family gathering a week later. "I always knew they underestimated you. Glad you proved them wrong." Officially Team Grandma. Jessica's husband tried to step in. He messaged me, asking if we could move past this. I replied, "I never started anything." He didn't message again. Meanwhile, Mike and the cousins kept the jokes alive. Every time I entered the chat, someone would say, "The champion has arrived." Mom eventually left the group chat. Then out of nowhere, David and I actually had a real conversation. For the first time in years, he admitted, "I always felt pressured to be the successful one." I didn't say much, but that was the moment I realized he and I might actually be okay. Jessica, though, still ranting. A relative told me she was still going on about how unfair it was. I found it hilarious. Then Mike dropped the ultimate idea. My birthday was coming up. He texted me, "Championship celebration." Think about it. I was very, very tempted. A few weeks passed and things had mostly gone quiet, at least on the surface. No more passive-aggressive family messages, no attempts to reframe the weekend as harmless fun. Then Dad called. Straight to the point, "Jessica thinks you should apologize." I laughed for a solid minute. Apologize. For what? Winning? Dad didn't like that reaction. He tried again, saying how Jessica felt humiliated and that this whole thing got out of hand. I asked the obvious question. Did Jessica apologize for treating me like garbage for years? Silence. Dad mumbled something about keeping the peace before quickly changing the subject. Then Mom tried. She called later that night, using her classic guilt trip tone, urging me to just say sorry so we can all move forward. I repeated my question. Did Jessica ever apologize to me? More silence. Then out of nowhere, David did something I never expected. He defended me. In the family group chat, the same chat where Mom and Dad had been pretending like the weekend didn't matter, David finally spoke up. Honestly, the whole thing was rigged, and OP still won fair and square. Boom. The message just sat there. Nobody argued. Nobody rushed to defend Jessica. Then Mike struck again. He photoshopped an image of me standing on a podium, holding the family champion trophy, with Jessica and David standing in second and third place. The chat exploded. Cousins spammed crying, laughing emojis. A few aunts and uncles sent thumbs up. Jessica, she rage quit the group chat. Didn't say a word. Just left. Nobody rushed to add her back. That was the moment the parents finally gave up. No more calls. No more attempts to guilt trip me. They just stopped. Then Mike escalated things even further. A week later, at a family BBQ, he presented me with a certificate of achievement, framed, signed, awarded to OP family champion, winner against all odds. The cousins were dying. Dad looked like he wanted to throw it into the fire pit. Mom's eye twitched. I took it with both hands, bowed like I had just won an Academy Award, and said, "Wow, I never expected this honor." Mike wiped away a fake tear. An inspiration to underachievers everywhere. Jessica's husband actually pulled me aside later. For the first time ever, he admitted, "I see now how unfair that whole thing was." I just nodded. Yeah, I know. And then, the most unexpected twist of all. Without the parental pressure, David and I actually started hanging out more. For the first time in years, we had real conversations. No competition, no weird family dynamics, just normal conversations. Turned out, we actually got along. And that's when I realized I didn't just win a rigged competition. I exposed years of favoritism, and now, they couldn't ignore it anymore. It didn't take long for Jessica to go nuclear. A cousin sent me a heads up. Jessica was calling me a manipulative attention seeker in private messages. Apparently, she was furious that I had turned the family against her, and was ranting about how I had always been jealous of her success. Not surprising, not worth engaging. Meanwhile, Mom was in damage control mode. She started sending out family unity messages in the group chat, acting like the entire weekend had always been about togetherness. No matter what, we're all family. And that's what truly matters. Mike immediately replied with a gold medal emoji. David, though, he was done pretending. He finally spoke up, bluntly stating, "If you wanted OP to fail, maybe you should have rigged it better." Silence. Mom and Dad didn't reply. Then Mike went full troll mode. He started calling me gold medalist in the group chat. Aunts and uncles joined in. Jessica, livid. Then came her next meltdown. She posted a vague rant on Facebook about how some people need to grow up, and how real success isn't about childish competitions. I couldn't resist. I casually commented, agreed. Maybe don't hold rigged competitions then. She deleted the post within the hour. Then Grandma got involved. At a family lunch, she straight up told Mom, "You were wrong for this. No sugarcoating, no excuses, just pure blunt truth." The room went dead silent. Dad tried to backpedal, mumbling something about how it was never about proving anything. I didn't even hesitate. Then why was the trophy pre-engraved with David and Jessica's names? Dad went completely silent. Then Jessica and her husband started avoiding family events. They conveniently skipped a cousin's birthday with some excuse no one believed. Meanwhile, relatives started coming out of the woodwork. A few privately messaged me, admitting that they had always noticed the favoritism but hadn't realized how blatant it was until now. Then, at another family BBQ, Mike escalated the petty war. He brought a literal plastic gold medal and put it around my neck. Jessica walked out immediately. The real shocker, David and I actually bonded. Now that the golden child pressure was off, he admitted he never enjoyed it. Said it felt like a job. For the first time, we actually talked like normal siblings. Jessica's husband tried to step in again, messaged me privately, saying Jessica felt embarrassed and wanted to move on. I replied, "She did that to herself." He didn't push further. Then Mom made one last attempt. She called saying, "If you care about this family, you'll let it go." I didn't even hesitate. I already won. I don't need to do anything. Then Jessica made her final move. She tried to plan a new family bonding retreat, but only invited people who had sided with her. The group chat, dead silent. Then finally, Dad cracked. At another family gathering, he begrudgingly admitted, all right, you were impressive." I grinned. That wasn't so hard, was it? A year later, and life has never been better. My freelance business took off after I started focusing on clients who actually respected my work. I moved into a better apartment, upgraded my workspace, and somehow ended up with an actual social life. Turns out, not needing validation from my family was the best decision I ever made. Meanwhile, Jessica has been on a full-blown rebrand tour. She suddenly pivoted into a family-first advocate on social media, posting about how strong families stick together and forgiveness is key to happiness. Nobody buys it. The same people who watched her melt down over a debate competition now have to see her pretending she's all about unity. It's embarrassing. David, on the other hand, his glow-up was completely unexpected. A few months ago, he quit his high-stress job to start his own private practice. Turns out, medicine wasn't actually his passion. It was just what our parents wanted. Now that he's doing his own thing, he seems happier than ever. Mike, of course, never changed. Randomly texted me last week, "How does it feel to be a living legend?" I replied, "Pretty great, honestly." He responded with a gold medal emoji. Jessica's husband, though, completely over it. At family gatherings, he looks exhausted whenever she launches into one of her personal responsibility speeches. One time, a cousin made a sarcastic comment about meaningless competitions and his soul physically left his body. The parents, they've softened a little. They still brag about David and Jessica like they walked on water, but now, for the first time ever, they acknowledge my success. It's always forced, like mom struggling to say, OP's business is actually doing pretty well. But hey, progress is progress. Then at Christmas dinner, Mike pulled the ultimate move. He sneakily handed me something wrapped in a gift bag. I opened it and nearly lost it. It was the original, pre-engraved family champion trophy. He whispered, "For the real winner." I was wheezing. Jessica immediately changed the subject. If anyone even mentions the Family Olympics, she shuts it down faster than a corporate PR team handling a scandal. Then Aunt Linda struck. Over dinner, she casually said, "Funny how OP was the only one who actually earned a win that weekend." Jessica stormed out. David and I, closer than ever, without the golden child nonsense hanging over his head. He admitted he resented the pressure our parents put on him. For the first time, we actually feel like real brothers. Jessica, though, still trying. She recently tried to host another family event, didn't invite me or Mike. It flopped. Nobody cared. Then the most unexpected thing happened. Mom's quiet apology. She never outright said sorry, but she started treating me with actual respect. That's the closest I'll ever get. And honestly, I'll take it. Grandma, though, still undefeated. At a family lunch, she leaned over and told me, "They thought they could humiliate you, but all they did was prove you're the smartest one in the family." I'm seriously considering getting that quote framed. Then Mike delivered his final masterpiece. He made custom Family Champions t-shirts for me, wears his to every family gathering. At this point, I can't even be mad. The final lesson? Sometimes, the best revenge is proving people wrong on their own turf. 1 year later, and somehow, Jessica has decided to rewrite history. She suddenly acts like she was supportive all along. At family gatherings, she casually mentions how the Family Olympics were just a fun bonding experience, and how she always knew I had it in me. I know better. She's still blocking me on everything except for the family group chat, which she rarely engages in anymore. Meanwhile, David made a big move. Literally. A few months ago, he announced he was relocating to another state to start fresh. No parents' influence, no expectations, just his own life on his own terms. He packed up and left, saying, "I just need to be my own person for once." I respected it. Maybe he finally figured out what I had known for years. Then Mom made one last attempt to salvage the situation. She invited me, Jessica, and David to a private apology dinner. David and I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. Jessica didn't show up. Aunt Linda, being the legend she is, took one look around and said, "Guess she's still mad she lost." I nearly spit out my drink. Then Jessica went back to her favorite coping mechanism, social media. A few days later, she posted a throwback sibling photo with the caption, "We've always been close." David and I texted each other at the same time. David, LOL me.